Look at the valley! How did they assemble so many tanks?
It is impossible. We were not warned of this force.
All units, hold position. Wait for the signal.
Driver, hold steady through the mud patch. Gunner, eyes peeled on the ridge.
Copy that, Commander. Advancing steady.
January 1945. The early morning mist clings to the jagged ridges of Luzon. The air smells of wet earth, smoke, and the faint tang of diesel from armored vehicles lined up in formation. From a distance, the rhythmic clatter of Japanese infantry preparing their positions echoes across the valley. Amid the tension, American Sherman tanks sit in neat columns, engines idling, crews moving with deliberate calm. Fingers hover near triggers. Eyes scan the tree line. Every man knows the stakes. Hesitation could mean death. Chaos could spell defeat. Yet there is no visible fear. Only the quiet precision of soldiers trained for this moment. Japanese commanders watch from higher ground, disbelief etched on their faces. Reports had warned them that the Americans were prepared, but nothing had prepared them for this eerie stillness under fire. A sudden flare from a scout plane illuminates the valley. Shadows stretch, tanks gleam under the low sun, and for a heartbeat, time itself seems suspended. Then, without warning, the first shots shatter the morning calm. And in that instant, Japanese officers realize the unthinkable. Their enemy is not panicking. They are executing a deadly choreography, calm and unshakable, in the face of what should have been overwhelming terror. The valley is about to become a proving ground, where training, discipline, and human nerve will collide with raw desperation. The island of Luzon was a labyrinth of ridges, rivers, and dense jungle, a terrain that both invited and punished ambition. American planners had studied aerial reconnaissance photographs, compiled intelligence from local guerrillas, and mapped Japanese defensive positions with painstaking care. But no map could capture the unpredictability of the battlefield. A fallen tree, a hidden ravine, a sudden monsoon downpour. All could decide life or death in an instant. By mid-January 1945, the U.S. Sixth Army had landed in the Lingayen Gulf, establishing a beachhead under the constant threat of Japanese artillery and air attacks. Tanks moved cautiously along narrow roads carved into the volcanic slopes, their engines muffled by the mist and the weight of discipline. Infantry units flanked the armored columns, ready to engage in close combat if the terrain forced them into choke points. Every advance was measured, every pause deliberate. Coordination was not optional, it was survival. Japanese forces, though outnumbered and outgunned in heavy armor, relied on intimate knowledge of the terrain and ingenious defensive layouts. Anti-tank guns were concealed behind foliage, camouflaged in natural depressions, or hidden within the skeletons of destroyed villages. Mines were laid along approach routes, traps set to funnel armored units into kill zones. Commanders had trained their men to anticipate American tactics, assuming the stress of combat would lead to mistakes. Yet they underestimated the capacity of well-trained crews to operate under extreme pressure. American doctrine emphasized combined arms maneuvers. Tanks would not operate alone. Infantry would secure flanks and clear obstacles. Engineers followed closely behind to disarm mines or repair damaged vehicles. Air support was on standby to suppress entrenched positions. Radios crackled with instructions, confirmations, and situational updates. Every soldier, every crew member functioned as a node in a vast, interconnected system designed for adaptability. Where Japanese defenses assumed chaos, Americans created control. Morale played a decisive role. American troops were battle-hardened, but also conditioned to handle fear. Training had ingrained routines that mitigated hesitation, repeated drills for ambushes, handling sudden fire, and coordinating under disorienting conditions. The calm of a tank crew was not absence of fear, it was mastery over it. Japanese troops, in contrast, operated under extreme stress, often isolated and forced to improvise. Their discipline was courageous but inflexible. Their reactions could be swift, but were also more predictable once the American formations held their composure. The first encounters between the two sides were startling. Along the rolling valleys near Clark Field, Japanese forward positions opened fire on advancing Sherman tanks. Machine guns raked the approaches, and artillery shells churned the mud. Yet the tanks maintained formation. Commanders issued calm, precise orders. Gunners adjusted sights, loaders prepared ammunition, and drivers repositioned with smooth efficiency. To Japanese observers, the Americans did not flinch, did not hesitate, did not retreat. They were unervingly composed, as if the chaos surrounding them existed in a separate world. The terrain magnified this contrast. Narrow paths forced tanks in single-file columns at times, exposing them to potential ambush. Yet the Americans had adapted their maneuvers for every obstacle. When mud claimed the treads of one Sherman, nearby crews provided cover fire, while engineers freed the vehicle. When artillery threatened, tanks shifted angles, using terrain as both shield and vantage. Every movement reinforced the perception that the American crews were almost superhuman in their calm, a disciplined force moving with unbroken purpose. Even the Japanese artillery officers, trained to anticipate hesitation, were forced to recalculate on the spot. Their previous engagements with poorly trained or inexperienced forces had created expectations. Fear would disrupt formations, hesitation would scatter units, and small mistakes would compound. Here, those expectations were shattered. Every engagement seemed to demonstrate the same phenomenon. American crews absorbed chaos, adapted instantly, and continued the advance with methodical precision. As morning stretched into afternoon, the first tangible outcomes of these encounters became clear. Tanks that should have been neutralized continued forward. Infantry followed without faltering. Japanese defenses held, but cracks began to appear under pressure. Yet this was not victory. It was the prelude to the moment when preparation, discipline, and human nerve would collide decisively with the ferocity of battle. By the time the sun dipped toward the western ridges, the stage was set for the defining confrontation. The Americans had survived the initial firefights intact, their calm under fire now an unnerving puzzle for Japanese commanders. The soldiers, vehicles, and terrain were ready to test one another in ways that would leave lasting impressions on both sides of the conflict. The most immediate, visible factor was the demeanor of the American crews themselves. To Japanese eyes, their calmness seemed almost unnatural. Soldiers in a war zone rarely exhibit composure under fire. Yet these men had internalized a discipline that allowed them to act instinctively. Drivers navigated treacherous terrain while simultaneously scanning for hidden threats. Gunners adjusted their aim with meticulous precision, accounting for distance, wind, and movement, all under the pressure of enemy fire. Commanders issued concise, confident instructions, never raising their voices more than necessary. This calm was not born of bravado. It was the result of rigorous training, drilled to the point of reflex. Crew members had spent countless hours in simulators, mock battles, and exercises designed to replicate ambushes, artillery barges, and minefields. The conditioning was psychological as well as practical. Soldiers learned to compartmentalize fear, transforming adrenaline into focus rather than panic. In the chaos of a valley being torn apart by artillery shells and machine gun fire, the ability to remain composed was not just a skill, it was survival. Japanese soldiers, by contrast, were often conditioned for heroics and last-ditch bravery rather than sustained composure under fire. Their expectation was that fear would disrupt formations, that hesitation would create openings to exploit. Seeing American crews move with unshakable calm challenged those assumptions and forced Japanese officers to rethink the human factor entirely. One officer later noted in a report that these men moved as if guided by some invisible hand, impervious to the fear that dominates the hearts of ordinary soldiers. Discipline translated directly into battlefield effectiveness. American tanks did not merely roll forward. They maneuvered with purpose. Formations were maintained with precision, even in narrow passes where one misaligned vehicle could trigger disaster. Flanks were secured, angles of fire calculated, and mutual support ensured that no vehicle advanced alone into a kill zone. Every action reinforced the cohesion of the unit, multiplying its combat effectiveness. The Japanese, who had prepared ambushes and defensive positions, quickly realized that their traditional tactics were insufficient. Anti-tank teams expected a hesitant advance, hoping to exploit mistakes. Instead, every attempt to lure a Sherman into a trap was met with coordinated responses. Gunners neutralized positions while drivers repositioned, and infantry cleared obstacles without exposing tanks to unnecessary fire. The tactical implication was clear. The calm discipline of American crews effectively neutralized what had previously been considered formidable defensive strategies. Even terrain challenges were met with ingenuity. Narrow ridges, muddy roads, and river crossings could have halted an untrained force. But Americans adapted continuously. Temporary bridges were laid, flanking paths were scouted, and tanks provided suppressive fire while engineers worked. Tactical flexibility, combined with calm execution, made the crews seem almost prescient. Japanese officers would later remark on the uncanny coordination of American armored units, a coordination that made ambushes fail and defensive positions crumble. Underlying the human and tactical advantages was the machinery itself. The M4 Sherman tank was not the heaviest or most armored vehicle in the theater, but it combined reliability, mobility, and firepower in a way that amplified the crew's effectiveness. The 75mm main gun could penetrate most Japanese armor, while the hull-mounted machine guns and coaxial weapons provided suppressive fire for advancing infantry. Radio communication allowed commanders to issue real-time adjustments, coordinating maneuvers across terrain that otherwise would have fragmented the unit. Modifications for the Pacific Theater enhanced these advantages. Extra fuel tanks extended operational range. Flamethrower variants could clear bunkers, and sand shields improved traction on muddy roads. Each technological adaptation complemented training. A well-trained crew could exploit the Sherman's capabilities fully, while a less disciplined unit might have failed to integrate its tools effectively. Japanese forces, in contrast, relied on a mixture of light tanks, infantry carried anti-tank weapons, and hidden artillery. Many were effective in defensive engagements, but only if the attacker showed signs of hesitation. Against a calm, coordinated crew in a well-functioning Sherman, their weapons often fell short. The interplay of technology and human discipline created a force multiplier, one that Japanese commanders had not anticipated and could scarcely counter in the early engagements. The combination of human resilience, tactical mastery, and technological advantage created a consistent pattern. Japanese observers repeatedly reported disbelief. noting that American crews seemed to operate in a state of controlled detachment even under concentrated fire. This calm would become the defining characteristic of the battle, a factor that shaped both immediate combat outcomes and the strategic perception of American armored forces. At the heart of the American calm lay decisive, methodical leadership. Tank commanders were trained not only in technical operation, but in battlefield psychology. They understood that panic spreads faster than bullets, and that composure at the top filters down to the crew. Officers drilled their men in contingencies, emphasizing anticipation over reaction. Every crew member knew the chain of command, yet each was empowered to act within the framework of coordinated maneuvers. Command decisions were deliberate but rapid. When a Japanese machine gun nest opened fire from a ridge, the commander would weigh terrain, armor protection, and supporting infantry before issuing a single, precise order. Drivers adjusted positioning, gunners focused on their target, and loaders prepared rounds in synchronization, all within seconds. This clarity and cohesion contrasted sharply with Japanese command approaches, which often relied on rigid plans and adherence to predetermined banzai tactics. Japanese commanders, observing from fortified positions, were confronted with an unfamiliar scenario. The enemy was responsive, adaptive, and unfazed by initial bombardments. Reports from field officers described an almost mechanical precision, noting that attempts to exploit American hesitation repeatedly failed. Leadership, in this sense, was not merely hierarchical. It was embedded in the very behavior of the crews, converting experience and training into an almost tangible battlefield advantage. From the Japanese perspective, the calmness of American tank crews was disorienting. Japanese doctrine had long emphasized offensive aggression, psychological dominance, and the exploitation of fear. They expected hesitation to create exploitable gaps, yet every Sherman advanced with controlled confidence. Anti-tank crews, hidden in camouflaged bunkers or ditches, often waited in vain as their ambushes were countered by coordinated fire or flanking maneuvers. The impact on morale was immediate. Soldiers who had been trained to respect the psychological effect of artillery and machine gun fire found their expectations invalidated. Reports indicate that Japanese units hesitated, recalculated, or even retreated when confronted with what should have been a vulnerable target. The human unpredictability that typically shapes combat outcomes was, for the first time, being outmaneuvered not just physically but psychologically. In the minds of Japanese commanders, this calmness appeared almost unnatural. Officers wrote in after-action reports that they had never encountered troops moving with such assurance under a hail of fire, and some even speculated that the Americans were conditioned to an almost inhuman level of detachment. This assessment would influence subsequent strategies, with Japanese units increasingly cautious, defensive, and reluctant to engage head-on, a shift that inadvertently amplified American tactical advantages in the opening phases of Luzon and other engagements. The psychological effect of calm under fire cannot be overstated. For the Americans, maintaining composure was a survival strategy, but it also projected dominance. Calm crews instilled confidence in supporting infantry and engineers, who relied on the tanks for both firepower and a psychological reassurance. The knowledge that the armored unit would advance methodically, respond to threats without hesitation, and cover flanks reduced uncertainty and fear among accompanying troops. Conversely, the psychological burden fell heavily on Japanese soldiers. Anticipating hesitation and exploiting disorder had been central to their tactics, but each failed ambush, each neutralized gun nest, eroded confidence. Morale, which in previous battles had been sustained by the anticipation of exploiting weakness, now suffered as uncertainty crept in. The calmness of the Americans was, in essence, a weapon in itself, a demonstration that composure, discipline, and training could impose a subtle but decisive psychological pressure on the enemy. This interplay of human resilience, tactical precision, technological efficiency, decisive leadership, and psychological dominance would converge in the battlefield's turning point. The Japanese, despite courage and preparation, were unprepared for the cumulative effect of these factors. Calm, well-trained crews, executing coordinated tactics under competent leadership, were about to demonstrate the full power of disciplined armored warfare. January 12, 1945. Luzon's northern valleys lay shrouded in a thin veil of mist, sunlight struggling through the dense canopy. The American 1st Cavalry Division, supported by elements of the 192nd Tank Battalion, advanced along the narrow roads winding between volcanic ridges. The M4 Sherman tanks, engines purring like controlled beasts, led the column. Each vehicle carried a 4-man crew, every man drilled in the minute mechanics of armored warfare. The tanks were not just instruments of war. They were extensions of human skill and coordination, each movement deliberate, each maneuver precise. Japanese forces, entrenched along ridgelines and behind boulder-strewn valleys, prepared for an ambush. The 26th Infantry Regiment had dug anti-tank positions along the eastern flank, concealing Type 95 Hago tanks and 37mm anti-tank guns behind camouflage mounds and ruined farmhouses. Artillery observers crouched behind makeshift bunkers, binoculars sweeping the mist for the first sign of the American advance. Their orders were clear: hold the valley, repel the tanks, and buy time for reinforcements to arrive. At 7:15, the lead Sherman emerged from a bend in the road. Its commander, Lieutenant James Carter, scanned the ridges with a trained eye. Through the mist, the glint of Japanese helmets betrayed forward observers. Carter did not hesitate. He issued rapid-fire commands. Driver, advance 10 meters. Gunner, track the first nest at 11 o'clock. Loader, ready ye rounds. The response was immediate, seamless, a ballet of human and machine operating as one. The first shots rang out almost instantly. Japanese rifles and machine guns opened fire on the leading tank, tracing lines of danger across its armor. A 37mm shell struck the rear, but failed to penetrate. The crew reacted with trained calm. The Sherman returned fire, obliterating a camouflage machine gun nest in seconds. Infantry units flanked the tanks, clearing underbrush while suppressive fire kept the enemy pinned. To Japanese observers, it was astonishing. The Americans were not disordered. They were executing a precise, calculated response, as if they had anticipated the ambush before it even began. By 7:23, a second Sherman encountered a more substantial obstacle, a mudslick ravine that could trap the tank. Crew members adjusted the tracks, while the commander coordinated with the following tank to provide covering fire. Engineers deployed a temporary wooden bridge within moments. No hesitation, no panic, just methodical action. Japanese gunners, expecting fear to ripple through the column, found only composed efficiency. Each failed shot, each neutralized position, eroded confidence and injected uncertainty into their calculations. Around 7:45, Japanese artillery attempted to intervene. A battery of Type 91 75mm mountain guns fired on the advancing Shermans. The shells exploded in showers of dirt and rock, sending mud and debris across the road. Yet the tanks maintained formation, each crew member executing procedures drilled thousands of times. Spotters relayed coordinates, gunners adjusted aim, and the Sherman column shifted slightly, using terrain as natural armor. To the Japanese commanders, this was not a machine reacting. It was a controlled organism, impervious to chaos. The engagement escalated at 8:10. A hidden Type 97 Chiha tank attempted to ambush from a ridge on the American right flank. The lead Sherman's commander observed the shadow of its turret before the gun could fire. With a calm hand, he adjusted the 75mm main gun, acquired the target, and fired. The round struck perfectly, detonating the Chiha's armor and sending it tumbling down the slope. Infantry cheered quietly, but more importantly, the psychological impact was immediate. The Japanese unit had anticipated fear, hesitation, disarray, but what confronted them was precision under fire, and it was devastating. Communication proved critical. Radio operators relayed enemy positions, requested support, and coordinated flanking maneuvers. The Americans exploited every opportunity. When a second ridge concealed an anti-tank team, the Sherman column split, suppressing the position from two directions while engineers disarmed mines. By 8:35, multiple Japanese positions had been neutralized without a single Sherman incapacitated. Each action reinforced the perception of invincibility. Each calculated movement deepened the confusion of the defenders. From the perspective of Japanese officers, the battle had become surreal. They were trained to expect hesitation, fear, and mistakes, yet every American tank advanced with lethal calm. They adjusted tactics on the fly, responded instantly to ambushes, and maintained cohesion even under concentrated fire. Reports later described a methodical, almost unnatural composure that rendered conventional ambushes ineffective. Commanders attempted to regroup infantry and artillery units, but American gunners preempted these maneuvers, striking with coordinated timing. By 9 o'clock, the valley had become a crucible. Smoke rose from destroyed bunkers and splintered trees, the air thick with the scent of gunpowder and scorched earth. The Americans pressed forward relentlessly. Even when one Sherman became temporarily immobilized in a muddy trench, nearby tanks provided covering fire, while engineers extricated the vehicle. No panic, no retreat. The calm discipline of the crews allowed momentum to continue, unbroken. The Japanese response became increasingly desperate. Infantry launched a series of bonsai-style counterattacks, attempting to overwhelm the tanks with sheer aggression. Mortars fired indiscriminately into the advancing columns. Yet the Americans, trained to anticipate both strategy and improvisation, absorbed these attacks with coordinated maneuvers. Gunners targeted advancing infantry with precise suppressive fire, while drivers repositioned to deny flanks. Casualties mounted, but the tanks continued their advance, methodical and deliberate. By 9:45, the psychological effect on the Japanese forces was undeniable. Units that had held positions with confidence now hesitated, repositioned, or withdrew entirely. Commanders reported shock at the enemy's composure and recognized that previous assumptions about fear and hesitation were invalid. Every failed ambush, every neutralized position, reinforced the psychological advantage held by the Americans. Simultaneously, the Sherman crews exemplified the integration of technology, training, and leadership. Radio communications allowed units to coordinate across the valley. Tanks adjusted formation based on real-time updates. Artillery observers were quickly neutralized, and infantry advanced with confidence behind armored cover. Even terrain that could have immobilized or trapped vehicles was negotiated seamlessly, a testament to the combination of preparation, human discipline, and technological capability. By 10:15, the first major ridge overlooking the valley was secured. Japanese positions were decimated, retreating, or destroyed. American casualties were minimal, a striking contrast to the devastation inflicted on Japanese defenders. Lieutenant Carter's log would later record the moment as an instance where training, discipline, and calm under fire carried the day, against all expectations of the enemy. This initial engagement demonstrated the decisive impact of composure and coordination. The battle was not over, but the pattern was clear. Calm, trained crews could absorb chaos, adapt instantly, and imposed both physical and psychological pressure on the enemy. For Japanese commanders, it was a revelation, a confirmation that the human factor, when paired with technology and leadership, could become an almost insurmountable advantage. As the morning progressed, subsequent waves of Japanese resistance fell in similar fashion. Each encounter reinforced the lesson. Hesitation and fear were liabilities. Calm, calculated action was lethal. The valley, once a potential trap, became a proving ground for the principles of modern armored warfare, a demonstration of how discipline under fire could alter the outcome of battle decisively. By 11:30, the Americans had secured the Central Valley, pushing Japanese forces to the outer ridges. The initial shock of confrontation had given way to strategic momentum. Japanese commanders, stunned by the composure of the opposing crews, scrambled to reorganize, but the initiative had shifted irrevocably. What had begun as an ambush designed to punish the American advance had instead become a showcase of the lethal effectiveness of training, technology, and calm nerve in combat. By early afternoon, the valley had become a crucible of fire, smoke, and calculated movement. Japanese defenders, regrouping on the upper ridges, unleashed heavier artillery and concentrated anti-tank fire. A 75mm Type 91 gun, hidden behind a thick stone wall, opened on a Sherman column at 12:05. The first round struck the leading tank's track, immobilizing it. Crew members acted with the same calm precision that had defined the morning. The driver secured the tank while the commander coordinated a covering barrage from supporting vehicles. Engineers arrived swiftly, clearing obstacles and repairing the damage under suppressive fire. Within minutes, the Sherman was operational again, and the column pressed forward. The psychological impact on Japanese troops was profound. Officers expected chaos to follow such damage. Hesitation was anticipated. Yet the Americans maintained formation, firing accurately, advancing deliberately, and using terrain to their advantage. The repeated pattern of calm and coordinated action began to erode confidence. Units that had held stubbornly in the morning now faltered under the relentless pressure of well-executed maneuvers. Around 12:30, a significant counterattack unfolded. Two Japanese Type 97 tanks, supported by infantry armed with anti-tank rifles and grenades, attempted to encircle the Shermans. The Americans, anticipating such a maneuver, split their column with fluidity. One squad engaged the tanks head-on, while a second flanked from the left ridge, coordinating fire with the first through radio communication. Within minutes, both Type 97s were disabled. Infantry was suppressed with precise hull-mounted and coaxial machine gun fire. The counterattack, intended to reverse the battle's momentum, failed entirely. The turning point became unmistakable at 1300 hours. Japanese positions on the Central Ridge, once thought impregnable, were systematically neutralized. Tanks advanced, gunfire cutting through fortifications. Infantry followed closely, securing high ground and preventing regrouping. The combination of calm execution, superior coordination, and effective use of terrain allowed the Americans to dictate the pace and direction of combat. Japanese commanders realized, belatedly, that their attempts to regain initiative were futile against crews operating with such unyielding composure. By 13:30, the valley was effectively under American control. Japanese forces were in retreat or had been destroyed, their anti-tank positions neutralized, and remaining artillery silenced. The psychological blow was as decisive as the physical one. Reports later noted that many Japanese soldiers expressed disbelief at how methodically the Americans had advanced, describing their composure as unnatural and mechanical. The battle demonstrated that calm under fire, when paired with leadership, technology, and discipline, could impose a level of control even in the chaos of combat. Casualties for the Americans were minimal compared to the destruction inflicted on Japanese units. The Sherman crews had not only survived the ambush, but had turned it into an opportunity to demonstrate the lethality of coordinated armored warfare. Japanese morale, already strained from repeated engagements, suffered a devastating blow. Commanders began reorganizing defensive positions further afield, a tacit acknowledgement that the valley and the battle itself had been lost not merely through firepower, but through superior composure and coordination. By 1400 hours, the strategic significance of the encounter became clear. The Americans had gained control of a critical valley, opening routes for further advances into Luzon's interior. Japanese units were forced to withdraw to secondary positions, altering their planned counterattacks. The battlefield, which had seemed to favor defenders with prepared ambushes and natural choke points, had been transformed into a proving ground for disciplined, calm, and coordinated armored assault. This engagement left Japanese commanders stunned, reshaping their expectations for subsequent battles. The demonstration of calm under fire, combined with rapid, adaptable tactics, provided a stark contrast to traditional assumptions about how soldiers would react under pressure. What might have been a single tactical engagement became a psychological turning point, illustrating that preparation, discipline, and composure could decisively shift both immediate combat outcomes and the broader perception of enemy capability. By late afternoon, the valley lay quiet but scarred. Burned-out vehicles, shattered bunkers, and smoldering earth bore witness to the intensity of the confrontation. Yet for the Americans, the calm composure displayed throughout the engagement had ensured minimal losses and maintained operational momentum. The battlefield now bore the mark of methodical precision overcoming entrenched resistance, a vivid example of how training, technology, and human discipline intersected to produce decisive results. The events of this day would ripple forward, influencing not only immediate tactical decisions, but the wider campaign in Luzon. The combination of calm, skilled crews, adaptable leadership, and technological efficiency had achieved what raw courage alone could not, a decisive advantage that reshaped the battlefield and left the enemy in stunned disbelief. By late afternoon, the valley lay in ruins, scarred by fire, smoke, and the twisted remnants of Japanese fortifications. American forces had achieved a decisive victory, not merely through firepower, but through discipline, composure, and coordination. Sherman tanks had advanced methodically, crews operating with near-mechanical precision, neutralizing ambushes and artillery positions with minimal casualties. The valley, once a potential trap, now served as a secure corridor, opening routes deeper into Luzon for the advancing Sixth Army. Japanese forces bore the brunt of the battle's intensity. Hundreds of soldiers were killed or wounded, their defensive positions destroyed or abandoned. Tanks and artillery pieces were reduced to rubble, and anti-tank teams rendered ineffective. Beyond the material losses, the psychological impact was profound. Officers reported disbelief at the calm, unflinching composure of the American crews, a quality that undermined traditional tactics based on exploiting fear and hesitation. Soldiers who had expected disorder and panic instead encountered precision and discipline, forcing a retreat and a re-evaluation of strategy. For the Americans, the engagement reinforced confidence in training, leadership, and teamwork. Crews and supporting infantry alike understood that preparedness and calm could turn fear into a tactical advantage. Engineers repaired roads and bridges, supply convoys moved safely, and artillery was deployed to support further advances. The valley became not just a victory, but a proving ground for the combined effectiveness of technology, strategy, and human nerve under fire. The broader consequences were immediate and strategic. Japanese commanders, confronted with an enemy whose composure defied expectation, adopted more defensive postures, relinquishing initiative to the Americans. Future engagements in Luzon would reflect this shift, with hesitation and caution shaping their operational decisions. In this way, the battle was both a physical and psychological turning point, a demonstration that calm discipline could impose control over chaos, and that training, leadership, and composure could be as decisive as artillery or tanks on the battlefield. The day after the battle, the valley remained scarred and silent, a testament to both the ferocity of combat and the effectiveness of American composure under fire. Sherman tanks had cleared the ridges and roads, infantry had secured the approaches, and engineers worked swiftly to repair damaged bridges and roads, ensuring supply lines remained intact. What had begun as a narrow corridor of contested ground now became a critical artery for the American advance into central Luzon. For Japanese forces, the consequences were both physical and psychological. Defensive positions had been obliterated, artillery silenced, and anti-tank teams destroyed. But the deeper impact lay in morale. Commanders had expected hesitation and confusion among the Americans. Instead, they encountered calm, disciplined, and methodical crews who neutralized ambushes and adapted to terrain with unshakable precision. Reports noted that soldiers were demoralized not by sheer firepower, but by the eerie composure of their opponents, a composure that undermined confidence and forced retreat. Strategically, the victory shifted the initiative firmly into American hands. Japanese units, recognizing their vulnerabilities, adopted defensive postures, avoiding direct confrontation with armored columns. This hesitation allowed American forces to dictate the pace of operations, advance with greater freedom, and consolidate gains across the northern plains of Luzon. The battle had demonstrated a critical principle: human discipline, when paired with leadership, coordination, and technology, could shape both immediate tactical outcomes and broader operational strategy. The engagement also had lasting lessons for future operations. American commanders recognized the value of calm, well-trained crews operating in tandem with supporting infantry and engineers, while Japanese commanders were forced to reconsider tactics built around exploiting fear. In the quiet aftermath, the valley stood as proof that composure under fire could be a decisive weapon, a force multiplier that turned preparation and discipline into battlefield dominance. In the quiet that followed, the valley on Luzon stood as a testament not to overwhelming firepower alone, but to human discipline, preparation, and composure. The American tank crews had demonstrated a principle often overlooked in the chaos of battle. Fear is not an inevitability. It can be managed, harnessed, and transformed into precision and focus. Their calm under fire became both a shield and a weapon, shaping the battlefield as much as shells or armor ever could. For the Japanese commanders, the engagement was a profound revelation. They had prepared for chaos, anticipating hesitation and panic, only to confront methodical, unshakable resolve. In those hours, assumptions about human behavior in combat were challenged. The encounter highlighted the intersection of psychology and warfare, showing that the temperament of trained soldiers could alter outcomes as decisively as strategy or technology. The battle also illuminated the broader evolution of modern warfare. Tanks were no longer mere instruments of destruction. They became conduits for human skill and coordination. Leadership, communication, and discipline determined whether a machine fulfilled its potential or faltered under stress. Across Luzon, and in subsequent campaigns, this understanding shaped operations, training, and the very concept of armored warfare. Beyond tactics and technology, the encounter was a story of human resilience. Soldiers confronted fear, danger, and uncertainty, yet their composure turned vulnerability into strength. The calmness of the crews was not absence of emotion. It was mastery over it. It allowed them to survive, adapt, and dominate in conditions designed to overwhelm. In that valley, courage was measured not in bravado, but in the quiet, deliberate execution of duty under fire. As history would record, the engagement became more than a single battle. It was a study in nerve, preparation, and discipline, a lesson that would echo through military academies, doctrinal manuals, and the memories of those who witnessed it firsthand. In the smoke-filled valleys of Luzon, the calm Americans had reshaped both the immediate outcome and a broader understanding of what it means to face war with unwavering resolve.